Hello and welcome, I'm Johnny and you want to spark user delight with well-placed, eye-catching animations. And we're gonna do just that with SvelteKit and Lottie. Svelte does have first-class support for transitions and animations, but they are limited to what CSS can do, which is a lot, to be fair, but I know I'm limited when it comes to bending CSS rules like a wizard. I'm no After Effects wizard either, but I can do much more, much easier with After Effects. And that's probably what Airbnb was thinking when they created Lottie. Lottie is a delightful library that takes animations you created in After Effects and renders them in web and mobile apps. And when I say you, I'm also including your dedicated design team, your video editor, or most likely some other super talented individual who uploaded their work for free on LottieFiles. So we can just go and search for heart, find the one we like best, and even quickly tweak its color palette. Pretty straightforward way to add on-brand flair for the like functionality in any app, which is amazing as this isn't Video Copilot. There is not gonna be an After Effects tutorial, I don't have a design team or anyone at all helping me with my videos. No sponsors either, so when I say LottieFiles is cool, it means I've actually used it and genuinely enjoyed it. And not that they've bid higher than Rive or whoever else. Rive is a cool alternative, by the way, but it's a bespoke tool to learn, and most of all, the community section is too confusing to me. There is no search. So Lottie and LottieFiles it is. Today we'll add a big looping animation to make our splash page more fun, and then we'll add a star, unstar animation in response to user interaction. These are real features in a real app you can check out, and I've also added a dedicated demo page for Lottie for your convenience. Alright, so let's go to lottiefiles.com, search for cat, and pick this extra cute one, plain with yarn. We could mess with the color palette too, but let's just get on with it and download this in JSON format. Let's move on to our editor. This is our techy.cat project. You can find open source and free on GitHub. It's a SvelteKit app. Here it is running on the right side of the screen. Our first goal is to replace this huge emoji with our animation. This is our index route. This splash page.svelte renders this hero component which has our huge cat emoji. This is what we want to replace. So let's bring in the library we need to make this happen. Let's install lottie-web. On the terminal, let's npmi dev dependency lottie-web. Alright, lottie-web can only run on the browser, so we need to go in our hero components script block and specify we want something to happen on mount, one of the lifecycle methods Svelte provides. What we want to happen is for Lottie to load animation. There are a few options we can pass here. The two most important and mandatory ones are about which animation to actually load and where to put it in. For where to put it in, we've got the container property, and we could use document query selector or similar to find the element we want to put the animation in. But the more svelte way to do this would be by binding the element to a variable. So let's declare let animation container, we'll type this as HTML element, and go down to our UI, remove the emoji, render a div element and bind this to animation container. By the time our onMount executes, animation container will already be an HTML element, so we can say container, animation container. Lottie will load the animation inside our animation container. Doing it this way, what I've called the more svelte way, doesn't really matter in this exact case, as we know we'll only have this one animation plane in just this one element. It's guaranteed to appear exactly and only once in our page, but it will matter for our starring animation later, for example. That animation will live inside elements that appear multiple times in a page and animate asynchronously. So just using document query selector won't cut it. So to recap, we've learned how to get the container element the svelte way through binding this, a good habit that satisfies all our use cases. That's cool. Second option we need to provide here is for specifying the animation we want to load. And again, we have a couple of ways to do it. We could use the path option, which takes a URL, so we could even copy and paste the one serving from the LottieFile CDN and not need to download or host anything. But the way lottie-web works means it will be making that request every time we render this component, which is bad enough for when people are navigating around the website and back to the homepage. That's already more requests than we'd have liked. but it's downright disastrous for our starring example later, where we'd be making a separate request for every star we render on the page. This is a fun problem because we can mitigate it. We can make it a bit better by serving the resource from our own domain. We can heavily cache it, we can cache it on the user's browser even, but all of that would be micro-optimizing a problem we don't need to have in the first place. So to avoid this problem altogether, we will not use path. Instead, we'll use animation data, which takes the JSON object of the animation itself. Essentially, instead of telling lottie-web, here's the path for you to fetch the animation from, we're saying, here's the animation data you need. You're welcome. And animation data is the JSON we downloaded earlier, so we can open the directory of our hero component, open our downloads directory, and drag and drop that animation JSON, and even rename it to something short and snappy. And now, thanks to Vite, we can just import animation data from cut-with-yarn.json, and that's what will pass to our load animation. With that, our animation renders perfectly because the two other Lottie load animation options we will care about today, loop and autoplay, both default to true, which is what we want in this case, so we don't need to pass them in. Our animation will start playing automatically and keep looping forever. Everyone agrees this looks wicked cool, but I'd actually advise against having an animation like that before the fold. Use with caution. What we'd usually do is a simpler CSS and SVG based animation in places like this, to minimize how much the user needs to load and how much the browser needs to do before the app starts looking all ready and interactive. I will do a proper video on Core Web Vitals at some point, especially if you keep asking. But for now, if you really want to put something flashy like this before the fold, at least make sure you specify its dimensions to prevent layout shift. You'll notice our content being pushed down when the animation loads, which is a bad user experience and bad for SEO, one of those great cases where those go hand in hand. To get around this, we can specify our container's height with CSS, so it'll be taking the exact same vertical space no matter whether the animation has been loaded or not. And we can even add an extra cheeky CSS animation as well, to hide how this gets loaded a bit further down the line. I find this trick keeps sites looking smooth, no one likes things popping in abruptly. Alright, splash page flare delivered. Next up, we got these idea cards. If I'm a logged in user, I can star an idea, which means I'll be able to find it in my profile page. If we look at the idea card component, we'll see that this works with SvelteKit Form Actions. It's a whole other video to really get into those, but the short of it is that our ideas page server TS allows for a couple form actions, star and unstar. If the idea is starred already, we submit to the unstar action. If not, we submit to the star action. This means if we click the button when an idea is not starred, we want to star it, add it to favorites. Conversely, if it's already starred, we'd only click on it if we want to unstar it. Again, it doesn't really matter for this video what the form actions actually do or what star idea does behind the scenes. But if you're curious, it hits the Supabase REST API to update a pivot table in our Postgres database. That allows the remote procedure call we execute to retrieve the ideas to also know whether the logged-in user has started an idea or not. Anyways, our goal now is to replace the star emojis with a fun animation, so let's go to LottieFiles once again, search for star, and grab this one. Let's play around with the palette a little bit to see how that flow works. Save it. You do need to have an account, you need to attach it to a project and whatever. Not super fond of this, I admit. But we can finally download the JSON file and drag and drop it in the directory of the idea card component. Let's find the directory, drag and drop, and rename. Cool, let's replace our star emojis with the animation, which should be straightforward. It'll be just like we did before, we'll bind a reference to an element. Instead of doing a ternary here to show the correct emoji, let's remove all of that and have our animation container actually be the button. So, maybe for clarity, we can let star button, it's an HTML button element, and we go back to our button and bind this. Awesome. On mount, the magic Svelte lifecycle method. In here, we'll load our animation. Our container is going to be the star button. Now we need to import the JSON we just downloaded and pass it in as animation data. And if we save, ta-da! However, as fun as this is, this time we don't want the animation to loop or auto-start, so we need to specify those options to be false. Sweet, the unstarred state looks sorted. However, some of these ideas we have actually starred. So how do we show them with a filled out star? Essentially, what we really want is for the starred ideas to render their animation on its last frame. How do we do that? As it happens, loadAnimation returns the animation item, which has quite a few handy methods for us to use. So, if we get a reference to that, we can say star animation goToAndStop, let's say 10. This number represents time by default, so goToAndStop at the 10th millisecond of the animation, which looks the same because a millisecond is like nothing, but the 1000th millisecond, 1 second in, the animation looks like this. Personally, I much prefer working with frames when it comes to animations, so if we pass in true as the second argument, our number will be representing frames. There is no 1000th frame for this animation, but there is a frame number 10. But what we actually want to do is go to exactly the last frame of the animation, which we can find out dynamically by calculating that the last frame is going to be star animation total frames minus 1. Frames are 0 indexed. The very first frame is actually frame number 0, so we need to subtract 1. So if we pass that last frame in, our animation will be guaranteed to go to and stay on its last frame, no matter the animation length. So even if we choose a different animation to import, we won't need to change any other code. Alright, we got every idea looking like it's in the start state now. What we actually want is to conditionally go to that frame. So if start is truthy, that's when we want to go to the last frame, else we want to go to frame 0, the first frame. And boom! The start state of our ideas is accurately represented. This means we're back to feature parity to what we had before. What remains is to play the animation on click. When I click now, nothing seems to happen. However, if I refresh, you can see that ideas have been starred and unstarred accordingly. So where and how do we trigger the animation to play when we click? As mentioned previously, we're using SvelteKit Form Actions for this functionality, and we're also using the enhance action to enhance our forms with client-side JavaScript. The enhance action optionally takes a method which runs immediately with the form submission. This is where we can do what's called optimistic updates. Before the server tells us that we have indeed succeeded in starting the idea, we can instantly give the user feedback as if everything went perfectly. We're being optimistic. And in case things don't go as planned, our enhance method can return another method which will run after the server responds, which is when we can dismiss our loading indicators or show an error of what went wrong, and even revert back to our previous state, take back our optimistic update. We've already set things up to update our start component accordingly from when we still had the emoji stars, so what remains is to trigger our animation. Let's slide the reference to our animation outside of the onMount so we can use it here too. First, let's make starring work. Much like goToAndStop, there is a goToAndPlay method. We can say go to 0 and again specify true as the second argument to use frames, not milliseconds. Amazingly, this just works, but of course we get the same animation playing even for when we unstar ideas, which is not what we want. Things work fine when we're starting an idea, not when we unstar. Easy enough to fix, very similar to what we did in our onMount. We want to check if we just toggled our start property to be truthy. If it is truthy, go to frame 0 and play. If not, we want to go to the last frame and play. But wait, if we're on the last frame of the animation already, there is no animation left to play, surely. And no, there is not, so what we'll do is play the animation in reverse. We're gonna use another method, setterAction. If start is truthy, we want to play the animation forwards, normally, which we do by specifying 1. Else, we want to play the animation in reverse, which we do by specifying -1. And now it all works perfectly. Or well enough. Sometimes we may want a unique animation for this, or no animation at all for a sad user action. We shouldn't give the user dopamine hits for things we don't want them to do. But for us now, reusing our existing animation in reverse will do just fine. One last thing, we mentioned this is an optimistic update. When the server responds, this method will execute, so if we get an error, we revert our starred property. It's a good idea to add a couple lines to goToAndStop to the appropriate frame to keep the visuals matching our state. Now, if we simulate being offline, you can see that the revert is so fast we don't even see anything. If we simulate the server responding with an error after a few seconds, we can see the state resetting as well. We usually don't want random animations to play in response to errors, although we probably would want a toast, some notification to let the user know that there has been an error and we couldn't star or unstar as they wanted. Believe it or not though, I am gonna call this done. Our starring and unstarring functionality is working absolutely perfectly with all the flair in the world. Again, all of this is open source and free on GitHub. techy.cat is a real app I do maintain to keep up to date with SvelteKit and its breaking changes, its best practices, and to showcase how I think some cool things can be done with it. The best ways I learn is by building things, by teaching, and by being wrong on the internet. And techy.cat has become this package deal where I'm doing all three, to reinforce our learnings and to let anyone hurt things without needing to faff about with magic links. I've also created this dedicated Lottie demo page. We've got a looping animation, heart and heart based on cookies, not Supabase, and a confetti button. Smash that button to celebrate your wins. I'm celebrating making YouTube partner, which means I can finally disable unskippable and mid-roll ads. Believe me, I'd have paid YouTube long ago to stop them from breaking our flow with ads. But that's not possible, so I just had to keep doing this for like 2 years. Though, sometimes it feels more like 13. Anyway, next steps could be experimenting with Lottie Light, a kinda hidden export from lottie-web. It ships fewer kilobytes, but only works with the SVG renderer, which is fine, that's what we've been using all along, but Lottie Light also drops support for a couple more features that may leave your animations not quite working, depending on whether they are using things like expressions. So try Lottie Light with caution. If you're really serious about smaller bundles, this hamburger menu animation is my favorite one we've done, and it's vanilla SVG and CSS, no extra libraries. And YouTube thinks you'll also enjoy this video. Thanks a bunch for watching, I'll see you around.